Hi, it's Roz. Back to talking about Ulysses, and this time chapters 3 to 6. Now, this is a bit of a niche video that is essentially for other people who are taking part in Ulysses 2020, or maybe if you've read Ulysses and you're interested in kind of other people's thoughts about it and experience of it. So if that's not your thing, stop watching now. Go make a cup of tea instead. And yeah, but if you are, then let's carry on, because I'm still enormously enthused by reading this book that I thought I might find heavy going and unappealing, and in fact I'm finding enchanting. I think enchanting is the word I would use. In the first three chapters, we were with the character Stephen Dedalus, and we went from sort of early morning breakfast time through to sort of somewhere in the middle of the day with him. In chapters 3 to 6, we go back to first thing in the morning, and but in the company of Leopold Bloom, and I think I understand that Bloom is kind of like the main character of the whole book. He is the Ulysses figure that we're going to follow through. So it's great to meet Bloom, it's great to meet Molly, his wife, in these chapters, and we kind of get a picture of him through his own head, and we also get a bit about some impressions of what his interactions with others and what other people think of him, particularly in chapter 6, I would say. So the chapter 3 starts, our introduction to Leopold Bloom is somewhat unexpectedly a paean to the delights of offal, eating offal. I just have to share it, I think, because it just it delighted me so much. So, Mr. Leopold Bloom ate with relish the inner organs of beasts and fowls. He liked thick giblet soup, nutty gizzards, a stuffed roast heart, liver slices fried with crust crumbs, fried hencods roes. Most of all, he liked grilled mutton kidneys. That is not how you expect to be introduced to a character, and boy, don't you just love the way Joyce does that? I do. I thought it was just superb. We're in a kind of quite an intimate early morning space at this point, and we get Bloom kind of like creeping around the house like you do when somebody else is asleep upstairs, and there's the cat wandering around and meowing and wanting to be fed, and it's very sort of domestic. And then his relationship with Molly, we kind of get drawn into that because he's quite kind of considerate of her. There's obviously like a fondness there, and he's kind of careful of her, treats her like a bit of a precious thing, and that feeling that is going to matter. I think we're getting hints about their relationship, and some letters arrive, and we kind of gather that he's a bit suspicious of the relationship that she has with this person called Blazes Boylan, and he's you kind of pick up that he's wondering, is she having some sort of affair with Boylan? It's not explicit, but you kind of get it. But then the other thing that you get in this chapter and the next about his relationship with Molly is that he has secrets of his own as well, and he's embarked on this kind of illicit correspondence with a woman called Martha. So they've both got secrets going on here. And one of the things that I wondered about this book is whether it wouldn't really have any plot, nothing much would happen, and so I quite like the fact that we're being set up with these little kind of puzzles and questions about their relationship and what's true and what's not true, and so in a sense that's, you start to see, oh yeah, there is, this is the plot. It's small scale, but it's interesting. Bloom's character, and talked last time about characterization, Bloom's character is fascinating, and part of his appeal as a character is he has this kind of mind that really flits around, and of course that links in with the sort of stream of consciousness kind of style, because we're in his mind, so we're seeing it flit around, and he'll be on one topic and then he'll be off on another, and which of course is, as we said before, this is what brains do in real life, but it's particularly true of him, I think. He'll suddenly start thinking about, I don't know, working out how much money you can make out of selling beer, and then he'll run into someone, and you get his sort of discomfort of trying to end a conversation that he's not enjoying, but is sort of like embarrassed to do that, and at the same time as talking to someone, he's watching something else happening on the other side of the street. So he's kind of like very flitty, very very kind of got his attention in multiple places at once. We even get a chunk where he's sitting on the outside loo, and I don't think that Joyce put that in. I think someone said to me that it's the first ever description in literature of someone taking a shit. I kind of half imagine that Chaucer might have done it or something before that. It's the sort of thing he would do, isn't it? But essentially, it is, and I don't think Joyce did it to be shocking. I think it's really to kind of, it's like a kind of a pact with us, the reader, letting us know you are going to get the completely uncensored experience of Bloom's day and what is going on in Bloom's mind. So if Bloom is thinking about how it feels to pass emotion, then that's what you're going to get, and that means that maybe you can trust that everything we get of Bloom's thoughts are genuine, that it's not his sort of tidied up version that he's going to share with us. It's the whole thing. Does that make sense? I'm not sure I've explained that very well, but it makes sense to me. Yeah, we get more impressions of how others see him in chapters 6 and 7, particularly 5 and 6, particularly chapter 6, which is the funeral chapter. But going to chapter 5, now chapter 5 it's called Lotus Eaters. That's the bit of the Odyssey that it relates to. And what is interesting is that in chapter 5 you get quite a lot of imagery around flowers, references to flowers, which of course fits with the Lotus Eaters sort of structure, because Odysseus's the men with Odysseus, his companions, eat flowers, and that sort of stupefies them. So, and there's a bit that I particularly enjoyed, which Alan, who's one of the hosts of Ulysses 2020, also picked out, and he asked me if I might think about reading it out loud, because he knows how much I enjoy the way Joyce actually just uses language and words, and I thought, yeah, fair dues, that's true. It was a bit that really did strike me as I read it, so I will. Now, what you need to know for this to make any sense, although if you're reading the book, you're probably only watching this as you're reading the book, so it will make sense to you, but just in case, I will say. So, Bloom has had a letter from the woman that he's embarked on this sort of secret correspondence with, and he reads, that's Martha, he reads Martha's letter to him, and that sets off in his flitty mind a kind of association with the language of flowers, and that's a Victorian thing where lovers in particular used flowers as a way of exchanging messages, and each flower had a kind of recognised meaning, and he kind of just goes off on one where he goes back through the letter and then does this sort of word association with flowers for different phrases in the letter, and I shall read it as requested. It's great, I think. I like it a lot. Okay, so Martha has put a dried flower, a pressed flower, in the letter, and he takes that out, unpins it from the letter. He tore the flower gravely from its pinhold, smelt its almost no smell, and placed it in his heart pocket. Now, get that, not his breast pocket, which is what you normally call that pocket in a suit, but his heart pocket, because it's the pocket that's over his heart. Interesting. Okay, then we get it. Language of flowers. They like it because no one can hear. Or a poison bouquet to strike him down. Then walking slowly forward, he read the letter again, murmuring here and there a word. Angry tulips with you, darling, manflower, punish your cactus if you don't please. Poor forget-me-not, how I long, violets to dear roses. When we soon an enemy meet, all naughty Nightstalk, wife Martha's perfume. There you go. So, look how the flowers are used there. Angry, tulip, kind of like red and upright and bold and a bit exotic maybe. Then what do we have next? We have with you, darling, manflower, punish your cactus. Cactus, punish, yeah, well, that's more straightforward, we get that. If you don't please, poor forget-me-not. Forget-me-not, small, modest little flower. Yeah, but with associations with remembering me, yeah. How I long, violets with longing, modest, kind of a quite a pure kind of love. To dear roses. Oh, then we're getting more into like big love, passion, yeah. When we soon an enemy meet, an enemy quite fragile maybe. All naughty Nightstalk, wife Martha's perfume. So he's conflating his wife Molly and her perfume, and Martha, his sort of prospective lover. Two made-up flowers in there, sort of, manflower and Nightstalk. Okay, and I hope I'm not alone in thinking like Nightstalk definitely says penis to me. So really enjoyable passage, and you could just kind of flash through that and just enjoy it, or you can kind of start to think like really sort of revel in the imagery. Then you can kind of link it to the chapter being called Lotus Eaters, and hence the sort of flower theme there. So that's the kind of richness, I guess, that you get, and that's what I'm trying to, I suppose, infuse about the richness, the layers, but also just, you know, like the way his mind works, that he's kind of reading bits of the letter and then doing this kind of word association. Very satisfying all round. Another bit in this chapter that I particularly liked was he goes into a church and is kind of watching the mass, and there it's like we then get Bloom almost being like an anthropologist, an ethnologist, like he's off observing the kind of tribal rituals of a tribe that he isn't quite part of, and this is where we start to perhaps understand his outsiderness, because he's of Jewish origin, and that is not, I think, made absolutely explicit in the book at this point. It's something that I just sort of know, I've heard, and it's interesting. One of our other readers taking part in this this Ulysses readathon, read along, Arlene, had sort of not picked up that he was Jewish and wondered why we were thinking that. And it's like actually the hints that he is quite subtle. Anyway, so he's observing this like this kind of anthropologist, and observing how they, you know, you eat the body of Christ, so it's like almost like cannibalism, or cannibals can understand that. It's like, what rum idea to eat a corpse, the Latin corpus, you know. Oh, and how the church is clever because it uses the Latin to kind of make people not notice perhaps that they're being asked to do such an odd thing like eat a body. And then a little bit later on he talks about blind faith, and there we get another link back to the Lotus Eaters sort of overarching theme, perhaps, because we're getting like the Catholic Church as something that stupefies, has a sort of soporific effect on Irish people, and yeah, that yeah, like opium for the masses, or whatever, yeah. So then we get chapters. There's loads more I could say about chapters like 4 and 5, but then we get chapter 6, and chapter 6 is an absolute stormer, because chapter 6 is Hades. It's the funeral. It's all death. Yeah. really fine chapter. A very readable chapter. I mean, all three of these chapters are very readable. They kind of flow, and although we get the sort of jumping around and the stream of consciousness stuff, you know, there's no, yeah, they're not burdensome in any way. But yeah, Hades, God of the Underworld, Dignam's funeral we knew was coming. We hop between perspectives in an interesting way in chapter 6. So mostly we're in the head of Leopold Bloom, but at times we hop out, and then there's like almost a narrator's voice, and as I say, we see him through others' eyes, which is interesting. And again, we kind of get to see a bit of his kind of like, he's a bit of an outsider maybe. We also get other people's views of Molly, his wife, and how attractive she was. But someone describes her as being like a good armful when she was younger. So there's something not altogether kind, I suppose, about how people talk about him and about Molly, although Molly is definitely admired as a performer, which is interesting. So yeah, again, we're being thrown bones by Joyce of kind of plot development, character development. At the same time, the other thing we get in this chapter is the really strong sense of place. So because the funeral procession, I suppose you'd call it, goes from Dignam's house to the cemetery where he's buried, and so we're kind of taking this quite literal journey through Dublin, and we're getting the sights, the sounds, the sensations as it rattles over cobbles, as we go over tram lines. So really strong sense of place, and you can see why people in Ireland and Dublin in particular have this huge affection for Ulysses as a book. Yeah. Oh, we get a little link back to Daedalus, who was the main protagonist of the first 3 chapters. So because in the Bloom is in a carriage in this funeral procession, you're behind the hearse, heading to the cemetery, and also in the carriage is Stephen Daedalus' father, Simon Daedalus. So all right, we get a connection there. Then they actually drive past Stephen walking in the street. So our 2 timelines from chapters 1 to 3 and chapters 3 to 6, no, get that right, 4, 5 and 6, finally intersect. And again, I feel that is Joyce doing us almost a little, like almost reassuring us that these things are, you know, going to interconnect, that we're going to get a coherent whole. If we've been starting to wonder, oh, was all that Daedalus stuff irrelevant because we've now gone off with Bloom? No, they interconnect. And Simon Daedalus, Stephen's father, says, "Oh, is he with that cad Mulligan?" So our feelings about Mulligan in the first chapter are kind of like ratified by Daedalus' father. Yeah, which is fun, which is nice. Now, but most of most of this chapter is really about thinking about kind of death and funerals and all the rituals around death, and what is it like to die, to do how many, there's a bit about how many that actually Bloom suddenly sort of envisages how many people are being buried across the world at any one time. It's all that's all quite bleak. Having said that, you still get little moments of humour. So like, I think that was something I said about the first 3 chapters, that you think this is going to be quite a serious book, and it is, but there's also a lot of humour in it. And even in this chapter, which is about death, you get these lovely little flashes of humour. You get talking about hearse, and they're being pulled by horses. That's the time period, if you remember. Going around a corner and going too fast and getting tipped over, and the coffin falling out. And it's kind of like a horrific scene, but also a bit of a slapstick scene, I guess. And then that leads him on to this kind of like bizarre and delightful discussion they have in their little carriage about how maybe it would be a good idea if they had like trams that went to the funeral, or like a train line that went to, instead of having these rickety carriages, you know, we should set up like a kind of a train that took people to the cemetery with a Pullman car. Weird, but yeah, lighter relief. We get in the funeral service, this lovely bit where Bloom has to kneel down, and he uses his newspaper that he's carrying with him in his hat to like cushion his knees, and this bit where he kind of tucks his hat round one knee and then holds the broom as he kneels down to kind of cushion him. And then the priest, we get the priest who because he has this kind of slightly outsider observation of Catholic ritual, and he describes the priest like a toad in a very kind of satisfying kind of way. I wonder if I can find it. Oh, I should try to. Give me one moment. Yeah, he talks about him having like a toad's belly as he comes out to speak, and then he's saying the words, and it's like in a fluent croak. That's it. And then later on he talks about having toad's eyes, and then he speculates about this belly and how does it get to be so fat, and like, oh, is it kind of wind from eating cabbage? Yeah, so we get like these little smiles in there, even as we're in this quite serious occasion. Then we get when the actual burial takes place, another like little humorous interlude. The caretaker of the cemetery talks about tells this little funny anecdote to some of the mourners as they walk towards the graveside about two drunks who came to visit a friend's grave, and one of the drunks is reading out the name of Mulcahy, the person who's buried there, and the other one is looking up at the statue, the monument on the grave, and it's a statue of Jesus, but he says, oh, like it doesn't look like him at all. It's a terrible likeness of Mulcahy, and so he's muddling up. He's not recognised it's Jesus, and he's muddling up with a person. And this is the bit that I liked above all, was that then the mourners kind of like Bloom and so on he say, oh, that's the caretaker kind of doing his job, trying to cheer us up a bit, kind of thing. And it's like Joyce is saying, here's me as the writer doing my job, trying to, I'm giving you this really heavy death and funeral stuff, but I'll just throw in a kind of a funny story to make you smile. So, yeah, we've got that doubling up of stuff all the time. I don't know, he's so skilled, basically, that's the truth. We do get to hear about two key deaths in Bloom's life, in these 3 chapters. We hear about his son Rudy's death and the impact, we get an inkling of the impact that's had on his relationship with Molly, even though it was 11 years ago, because you don't bounce back from your child dying, do you? And we also hear about his father's suicide and how important that is in his life, and you get the feeling that both those things are going to kind of run on as themes through this day. Latter part of the chapter, you get a whole load about corpses and rotting, and a bit where Bloom actually imagines what it's like to die, like you're being on your own deathbed and what you might think and feel. It's all kind of, yeah, quite heavy. But then he's been doing this sort of bit about the sort of rotting corpses and so on, and then suddenly again his brain, he goes off on one where he starts to think, oh, maybe we should make gramophone records of our loved ones before they die, so that we can be reminded of their voices in the same way that we remember their faces because we have photographs. Where did that come from? Yeah, I think that's enough to say about these 3 chapters, because I thought this would be really short and it's still actually been really long. What I would say, I suppose, is that I continue to be of the view that you can revel in this book and this writing by just reading it, but you definitely have to read it with 100% attention, because if you don't, it's like blink and you'll miss it. There's like little flashes again and again that if you're not paying attention, you will really lose out. And that's why it does feel worthwhile to go back and like read a chapter once and enjoy it, and then go back and think about it and reread it and maybe look some things up, and it merits that attention, whilst being such a pleasure to read as you read it. that's enough.